Thanks for joining in. I have been busy in the last few weeks rereading a manuscript that will be released in a few weeks called Faith in the Age of AI. And by the time you watch this, it might have been released a long time ago. But the subject that I have today is timeless. Editing is never done until the book is released, and then afterwards you can revise it in other publishing because you have to catch all the mistakes and you kind of shift and you hear back from other people. So it's kind of a fluid work until an author is dead, I suppose. But as I have been reading back through this book, I've noticed something. I have realized how much my mind and understanding of the world has been shaped by a group of people who are all deceased now, who have impacted really a huge portion of the world and certainly impacted Christian faith. And some of the best known what depends on what part of the church or world that you're coming from, but C.S. Lewis is probably the most recognizable of these names. And there was an official group that met at a little pub called the Eagle and Child for many years at Oxford. And those members were six. I don't recall all their names, but I know C.S. Lewis's brother, Owen Barfield, J.A.R. Tolkien, and a few others met to talk about their books. And it is commonly thought that this community of thinkers and people who were coming to faith and wrestling with faith hugely impacted one another, and none of them would have been as powerful writers as they became because of their critique and constant bickering and also their prayer for one another. It's quite a remarkable thing. We call them the Inklings, but I want to talk about even a larger group of people that were connected with them in philosophically to create almost a philosophical Christian school. So there was the generation before C.S. Lewis, George MacDonald, G.K. Chesterton. There are people that are still alive that were greatly influenced in their young life by Lewis and Tolkien and company, and that would be people like Peter Kreeft and even N.T. Wright. But I had the wonderful privilege of doing a summer study program at Oxford University, Keble College, in 1992, and going through Lewis's home, and some of the people that were connected to that movement were still alive. Dorothy Sayre, the great mystery writer who got pulled into this circle and deepened her own faith. I met her secretary, Barbara Reynolds, who completed their work on Dante's Commedia, and that was just really formative weeks for me. I think this is one of the greatest revivals of our time. Now, if you come from kind of a revivalistic tradition, you may not kind of think of this as a revival. There was not this kind of phenomena a lot, though there were some. It was simply a few kind of brainy folks that were wondering if Christianity was real or not, and they debated and thought, and some of them quite reluctantly began to be pulled into the orbit of practicing faith and commit themselves to walk with Christ. Some of them were really surprising. Michael Polanyi was the Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, I think in 1937, though I don't have that in front of me. And he was a nominal Christian and was a Hungarian, and he went to Oxford to escape the Nazis and so forth, and deepened his own faith and wrote some remarkable little books that have been very transformative on economics, on neurology, and just the philosophy of science in general. By the way, his brother was Karl Polanyi, a major Marxist thinker, and I would have loved to have been around to hear their discussions. But I just want to talk about the impact of a community of thinkers. I have a book on my shelf behind me that's called The Sociology of the Philosophies. It's a mouthful and it's a huge volume. And it's a study of how great thinkers over about 100-year period. So you've got about 3 generations of thinkers, and all the people that get pulled into their orbit, people that are for them, against them, people who are not as major creative thinkers, but who synthesize, and how this changes the world. And in that book, the very first example is Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, 3 generations of thinkers, and all the people connected with them that continue to impact our world today. But the Inklings, Lewis and Tolkien and Sayre and Barfield and Polanyi and all the people connected with them, Sayers, these people did not all agree with one another on things. But there's something about the synergy of their thought that is transformational. And I realized as I was going through this book why they were so transformational. They were living in the early days as modernism was giving way to postmodernism, and most of the world had never even used these terms. I don't think they ever did. But there was a great shift occurring intellectually. C.S. Lewis was on the kind of reactionary side of this. In fact, he was kind of a convert to pre-modernism. So he said at one time, there was a moment when by the grace of God I ceased being a modern man. I love that quote. It says a lot about me too, I guess. But he would have thought himself more as rooted in pre-modern way of looking at things. And then there was Owen Barfield, which sometimes Lewis thought was kind of what we would say New Agey. That he was a little too far out there on the kind of pantheism kind of edge and not reliable in his Christian orthodoxy. I think actually Owen Barfield was. He was just wrestling with what was becoming postmodern thought and did so extremely well. His book, Preserving the Images, I'll think of the name of the title in a moment. I shouldn't have brought it up, I guess, but I've read it 2-3 times. Barfield really had his fingers on the pulse, trying to figure out what postmodern thought would be like. And together, they even thought about things like disembodied intelligences, computer kind of intelligences. Lewis did that for sure. And I think in what many people think is his most bizarre book, That Hideous Strength, he speculates on kind of a brain in a vat that is trying to run a college and all the evil that comes from that. And as I just read, I read these authors again and again. I've read them very extensively, and I didn't realize what they were doing to me. They were teaching me how to think. They were giving me words to think with. They were much more educated than my background gave me the possibility of being. And they have been my great teachers, and I am so thankful for them. I would have not read Dante had I not read Lewis. I may not have read Aquinas had I not read Peter Kreeft. Peter Kreeft would not be Peter Kreeft if he had not read Lewis. So there is a kind of a chain of thinking that goes on here. I wanted to give credit to these great thinkers and also for their great courage in living a Christian life, making a Christian profession at a time where much of the world, in the intellectual world, the academic world, was scoffing on that as a bygone kind of spent philosophy. Christians today quote all these people, but they rarely read them deeply. Because if we read these folks deeply, we will not get in a war with secular thinkers. They didn't. they disagreed, but they also realized that the faith that they had committed themselves to required a change of personality and a way to relate to others and a careful listening to others. And all of them were careful to admit when someone had a question that had stumped them or there was a question for which they had no answer. Uh, and that's what makes their work so delightful and trustworthy. So that's my thought in this episode, a tribute to the Inklings and all the people related to the Inklings who have made such an impact on my life. I thank you for joining me today. And as always, I am working. You're watching me trying to work my computer and know how to end an episode. But hopefully, these are getting at least bearable. And I appreciate you so much for joining in and all of your wonderful comments.